This lecture is being recorded by the AIA. This is a live presentation and recording by attendees is strictly prohibited. The AIA respects the intellectual property of its presenters and asks that viewers do the same. Thank you for your cooperation. Good afternoon and welcome to our next installment of author lectures, Historical Fiction, an End Product of Archaeology. I'm Laura Rich, Vice President of Outreach and Education for the Archaeological Institute of America. The AIA is a nonprofit organization dedicated to archaeological inquiry and public understanding of our material past. Participating in this event is one step in helping to advocate for the preservation of the world's archaeological heritage. If you would like to further help, we encourage you to donate by texting GIVE to 833-965-2840. Archaeology is the scientific exploration into our material past. The magic of Stephen Saylor's work is to provide a storyline that interprets and gives a realistic story to the detritus of our past. Stephen is a native Texan and graduated with high honors from the University of Texas at Austin, where he studied history and classics. He translated his fascination with the past into 12 books in the mystery series known as Roma sub Rosa, with its fascinating protagonist Gordianus the Finder, as well as his Roma trilogy, of which Dominus is the final installment. I will say I was skeptical when I heard that the last book covered from Marcus Aurelius to Constantine. It's a lot of years and a lot of emperors to cover, but Stephen wove the story brilliantly and brought the ancient city of Rome to life. I was particularly struck when a character named Titus reflects that history was an odd thing because of all the things it leaves out. It was like a stage play with only a handful of actors when the tale to be told involved teeming multitudes. For those of you joining us because you are already a fan of Stephen's, we welcome you to the AIA and hope you will join us for more lectures. For those who have not been introduced to Stephen yet, you are in for a treat. One last note, please type any questions into the Q&A section and we will get to it as many as we can after the lecture. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for having me and for this invitation to speak to AIA. It's special to me for a few reasons. One is that I find myself, I believe, at the end of a long arc of 30 years of writing fiction about ancient Rome. I'm sort of at a summation point in some ways. Also, it's really good to be speaking to a group like this because over the last 30 years, I've split my time between speaking to mystery readers and to sometimes to scholarly groups. And there's a big difference in what the actual appreciation of some of the material is. And I know that this group is savvy to so many things that I put in those books that I find in the research. I'll do a little précis of how this all happened. The first book is called, in the Roma sub Rosa series, is called Roman Blood. And I was fascinated from ancient Rome from childhood because when I was a child, we had gladiator movies with Steve Reeves. We had Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor. All that was just this big world of wonder, maybe what Star Wars was for later kids and who knows what now. So that really whetted my appetite. I grew up, though, in a very small town. We did not have anything like Latin courses. So I was really starved for more stuff about the ancient world. So when I got to UT Austin as a freshman, and I realized I could take nothing but history classes if I wanted to, that was as my major, I thought, I can't believe they're going to let me get away with this. So of course I dove into ancient Rome, ancient Greece, the Byzantines, many other courses, French Revolution. And people would ask me, what are you going to do with your history major? And they assumed I would want to teach. I said, well, I don't really want to be a teacher. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So after I finished college, it lay dormant for about 10 years as I moved from Austin, Texas to San Francisco. I started getting into other kinds of publishing, wading into trying to be a writer. And I tried to write a novel about the Byzantines. And at that time, the sources, hardly anything was translated from the Greek. And the sources were so dry as dust, I couldn't get any traction. And I finally made my first actual trip to Rome around, I think it was 28 or 29 years old. I finally got to Rome. And that first experience of that much jet lag, that much culture shock, that's a unique event for anyone. And I remember we got into Rome, we found our way to the city, we got our pension, we stumbled out, and we found our way to the forum. And at that time, there was no gate, you just walked into the forum. It was open to anybody who wanted to go in there, and you could touch anything you wanted to. It was quite wonderful. And I remember I thought this was like an acid trip. It was so, the jet lag, the wonderfulness of it. And that was a moment that really fired my imagination and changed my life. So I came back to San Francisco, and I was, at that time, as a reader, I was deep into Sherlock Holmes and mystery fiction. And I thought, you know what I'm really craving? I want to be back in Rome in my mind. I want to be reading a mystery novel at the same time. What is there? And at that time, this was before this huge influx of historical mysteries that happened in the 1990s that I was a part of. So there really wasn't the book out there to satisfy me. And so I reached for a book, which is seldom that people could say, this book changed my life. But I reached for the Penguin edition of Michael Grant's wonderful translation and notes about Cicero's murder trials. All the murder trials in one place. In one place. It's amazing. So I thought, this is good. This might hit the spot. And I think I was probably halfway through the very long oration in defense of Sextus Roscius, one of Cicero's first big cases, his first really major case, a man accused of killing his father, of which Cicero tells us the penalty was to be sewn up alive in a sack, along with a snake, a rooster, and a monkey, I believe. I was always like, where do they get that monkey? Do they have monkeys waiting for this in some temple? So horrible penalty. Cicero, I won't say how the trial went, but I thought, this is a novel waiting to be written. Cicero gives us so much meat and material about the actual events and the people involved, and what we think the motives were of those who actually held the trial and did the murder. So I started working on that. And it was 2 years later that I actually had finished my manuscript. And it was my first novel that I'd finished, at least. I managed to get it to a New York editor who managed to buy it. And I was off and running. I thought, though, that I had written just a single novel, Roman Blood, a mystery set in ancient Rome. I didn't know the appetite that was out there for series fiction, which now we take for granted. But at that time, my model in many ways was Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, which had sort of changed the landscape for writing about ancient history or old history and putting it into a murder mystery frame. So the book was just successful enough, sold very few copies, but just enough copies and some foreign rights and some paperback that they wanted me to do a series. And what a gift that was to me, because to be able to go back into the ancient Roman, into the Republic, I think the ripest period, so many fantastic sources, so many larger than life characters, so many murder trials, so many all the politics and skullduggery. There was a lot of work for a detective to do in that period of ancient Rome. So something that relates to archaeology, I'll just tell you a little anecdote. One of my very first appearances as an author, I was in a private home in San Francisco, and there was a woman who would organize mystery reader events, and she would get some of the books and come around, and you'd just be in someone's living room, and the author would meet people, they'd read your book, and you answered questions. And as a neophyte author, I hadn't heard all the questions yet. You do hear the same questions over and over the course of 30 years. Sometimes you get one that, though, completely throws you. It still happens to me. And in this case, I told the story about Cicero's murder trials, and how, and also just having my first visit to the forum, how that just ignited a fire in me that continues to burn. And that was really it, being in the forum, the electrical impulse that went through me, Cicero's murder trials. And I think the group, they may not have normally have read an historical novel. They kind of did this because I was local. And the woman who was hosting afterwards, when they had a little Q&A, she said, well, there's something, you talked about this going to the forum, and I've been to Rome, and I went to see the forum, and all I saw was a bunch of bricks. And I can hear your collective groan out there, and just, the hackles rose on the back of my neck because I had no comeback for this. If you don't see it, so I think I said something like, maybe you're not the ideal reader for my books, which was probably the case. But I have been trying to join those two fascinations over the last 30 years of the murder mystery fiction and the ancient history, and getting in touch with those actual visceral touching the things themselves, seeing the actual ruins, reconstructing from that what we know about ancient Rome. My books did pretty well in Europe. My biggest markets, oddly enough, ended up being Poland, Hungary, and Portugal. Why those countries, I don't know. They handled it very well. They've all had me over for book events. And I remember being in Hungary the first time in Budapest. I think we had an event out at Aquincum, which of course is the major ruins right outside of Budapest. It's along the Danube. So this was a major Roman point along the Danube, especially in the times of Marcus Aurelius when he was fighting those Germans. And so at Aquincum, I remember wondering, I had a guided tour by Orsalia Lang, the head of the excavations. And I remember seeing the latrina there that they'd excavated. And I thought, well, let's go over that. And I remember sitting there on a toilet in Aquincum, looking out at the view and thinking, Marcus Aurelius himself may have sat here and had deep thoughts. I felt my first connection to Marcus Aurelius. And I thought, I'm going to do that with something with that someday. How am I going to get to Marcus Aurelius? I don't know, with Gordianus in the time of the late Republic. So that was also another electrifying moment of feeling a connection with the ancient past. And I'll also say something that happened at those ruins as we were leaving outside the actual grounds. They were doing some excavations, and it was near to some modern office buildings that had just gone up. But here they are, these pits. And they were down there digging up actual human remains. And I'm not sure when they dated from, but that was the first time I ever saw actual human remains in situ. And I told Orsalia Lang that. And I guess she saw the look on my face and she said, yes, there's nothing quite like that, is there? So that was another moment where I felt the connection and how special that is. And then in Lisbon, I was also treated to a private tour to some excavations. And that was in downtown Lisbon. It's kind of in a gorge, really. It's a magnificent hilly landscape. As you go down the hill, you reach the waterfront. And near the waterfront in the old downtown built up area, we went at night, I think. We went into the lobby of a modern bank building. We went down some stairs, down into this pit. They turned on the lights, and there was this wooden walkway or metal walkway going above excavations. And these were it was a garum manufactory making that wonderful fish spice sauce that everyone loved in ancient Rome. That's what they thought this was. These were actual pits for raising the fish, the little sardines or whatever. And that too was just an amazing moment to have been in modern Portugal, and then to go down there and to see the actual Olisipo, the ancient Roman name for it. And readers in Portugal would often ask me, can't you get your hero Gordianus over here to Lisbon, to Olisipo? We want to have an adventure here. I never could quite pull it off. The history just wouldn't cooperate with me. But I did get a story out of that, which I think was called Something Fishy in Pompeii, where Gordianus goes to investigate a murder on the Bay of Naples, and we get to see the garum manufacturing, the fish and everything, and to include that in the story. So there have been times when actual, having seen things, it just brings it to life for me, and then I can make it into fiction, hopefully. That series with Gordianus wound up a couple of years ago with the novel The Throne of Caesar, which we finally got to the big climactic point, which is the murder of Julius Caesar, the biggest, most famous murder, of course, of the ancient world, perhaps. Now, how to make that into a murder mystery, I can't tell you. That's my trade secret. But I did sort of, in reviewing all of the people involved and what was happening in Rome that very week, I mean, day by day, the accounts that we have are so fantastic for a murder story, knowing what's going on with all the different characters and what they're planning to do. Gordianus just kind of see the events unfold, and there's a parallel event happening at the same time, another murder. which is a real historical murder, that I actually wove the mystery into. So that was The Throne of Caesar, wrapping up the Roma sub rosa series. But parallel to that, I had begun another series that started with a book called Roma, which was how that happened was I was in London on book tour once, and my editor said, the publisher, Nick Robinson, who's no longer with us, I'm afraid, he was a wonderful man. Nick wants to have you to his flat in Mayfair because he has a proposal for you, a proposition for you. And of course, the author is very excited about this. The publisher's going to have me to his home. He wants to talk something over with me. So we got there, and we had cocktails. And Nick said, Stephen, why I've asked you here, we've had pretty good success with your Roma sub rosa series so far, but I think we can reach a wider audience. I think we can move you up a notch. And to do that, and I'm listening very carefully, of course, to do that, what I want you to do, I want you to write a big book. And that was it. That was the charge I was given, a big book. But once again, there are these moments that happen unanticipated. That just, a spark went off in my head. And I thought, well, James Michener, the famous author, and Edward Rutherford have made careers out of writing these books in which the name of a city is the title of the book. And really the city or the place is the character. And we see generations of people pass through at that place. With Michener, he wrote a book about Poland, about Chesapeake, Texas, his famous book, The Source, about the Middle East. With Edward Rutherford, he did London, was a huge success. I think he did Dublin, Rusca. So I thought nothing's been done like that for ancient Rome. We don't have that book. So what if I do a book, we'll call it Roma, the novel of ancient Rome, and we'll do from prehistoric Rome, perhaps as far back as Michener would do, which was the cooling of the Earth's crust, the mantle, and bring it forward through time, archaeological time, real-time human time. We can do Rome, we can start at prehistoric Rome, and then get all the way up to Fellini, all the way up to my childhood, the Rome of my childhood. That'll all be in one book. Won't that be fantastic? Well, of course, as I started doing the research, it became more and more evident there was no way to cram all of that into one novel. Never could that happen. So I scaled it back, and I thought, for Roma, we're going to do from prehistoric Rome, the appearance of Hercules in legendary times passing through Rome. We have that. Romulus and Remus, of course, up through historical Rome, Coriolanus, that's a great story nugget, up through Hannibal, marching in Italy, get up to Caesar and the assassination of Caesar. So what if we do from prehistoric Rome up to Caesar? And then that will be Roma, and we'll see if that works. And to tie the generations together, I did use an artifact, and that was of a Shinum, one of those little penis amulets, sometimes with wings, sometimes not, that we find everywhere. I don't know why every museum doesn't have them all out for us to look at the whole collection of these things, these amulets, because we know from the most ancient Roman legends, there's a sighting of a penis levitating in a fireplace, in a fireplace. And we're told that that is probably the earliest indigenous Roman deity that we have any connection to. And it's nothing like anything in ancient Greece. So I thought that is something very peculiar to Rome, and it goes through the history. What if we start out with an amulet like that, and we'll carry it through the generations? So that will also tie them. I mean, we know that, for example, the Vestal Virgins, when there was a triumph, the Vestal Virgins had charge of this phallus, and they would bring it out and they would put it under the chariot of the triumphing general or emperor. And that was there so that as he went through the streets, the accolades of all of Rome, that would ward off the evil eye of the envious. And so we also know that mothers would put these phallic amulets in cradles with children to ward off the evil eye of the barren woman who might curse the child or the mother. So that became the amulet that passed through time. That book did well enough. It was actually, Roma has been my best-selling book ever around the world. And I did have a really author moment once. I was in a Costco shopping. And I don't know if you have Costco's where you live, but there are these gigantic warehouse shopping places. And there I saw Roma was right there in Costco, big bank of Roma, along with the Stephen King and the Harry Potter. And you feel like a real author when you've seen your book pushing your grocery cart in that Costco. So the next book we did in that series was called Empire. And my charge there was to take it from the reign of Augustus up to Hadrian. I thought that's going to be a chunk. We're going to get all the crazy emperors in there. We're going to go all the way to the height of the empire with Hadrian. And that became the novel Empire, which just wonderful research. It was a very different book from Roma because Roma was very driven by legend and hero and characters, larger than life characters. When you get to the imperial period, it's just empire, it's emperor driven. It's just all the scandal about the emperors. And I wanted to keep the action in the city of Rome, of course. So we have what's happening right in the imperial palace. One of the things I reflected on was, what we have from Suetonius about those emperors was actually written for the court of Hadrian. So when we take the story forward up to Hadrian writing, looking back on that within the same novel, I mean, the audience for those stories was Hadrian and his court. Does that explain why they're so full of the graphic sexual details? Is that what Hadrian wanted to read about? So, or is it really a very authentic look at those? There are many angles you might have taken with those emperors. So it was a big education for me to actually delve into all of that material. And of course, with the end of that book, we come to the childhood of Marcus Aurelius in the household of Hadrian, sort of a foreshadowing of what might happen next. And through that, all the phallic object goes all the way through that story too. At the end of Roma, though, there's a moment when the phallus has become so sort of worn. It has wings, but it's become so worn over time that it's just, you can't really almost tell what it is. And somebody looks at it and they think it looks like a cross, like a crucifix. And that was to be foreshadowing about what was going to come in the future. But one reader wrote me and said, "Mr. Saylor, I am appalled. I've read all of your work and I don't understand how this could happen. At the end of Roma, you seem to have become a Christian apologist because you have the Roman ornament becoming a crucifix." And no, that's not exactly what happened. So I had to sort of correct that idea when I wrote Empire, that it's going to be a much more complicated story than that. Although, of course, we have the first beginnings of Christianity in that book. And one of the few anachronisms I've ever done on purpose was to make the crucifix and the cross sort of an important talisman for the Christians earlier than we actually know it to have been. But for my story purposes, we have that happening. And so from Empire, we finally get up to the final book in the series, and it becomes a trilogy, which is called Dominus. This is the American cover, a magnificent old French painting of, I think it's the martyrdom of Saint Anne, who's not in the book, but we do have Christian martyrs. So the huge panoply of the things happening in Rome. I want to show the British cover because they're always very different. They reissued all three books, and they wanted to have an actual object for each of the books. Now, I got to choose the objects. They would have had God knows what on this book, something anachronistic. But I said, actually, they offered this. I said, actually, the Marcus Aurelius statue is perfect for Dominus because Marcus Aurelius is in the book, and so is the statue, and it has a story to tell within the book. So from Dominus, we went from reign of Marcus Aurelius, the beginning of the real problems for the empire, up through Commodus, known to everyone from the movie Gladiator. I hope I have corrected some of the notions that Ridley Scott put out there about Commodus. I think that Commodus is not the right Commodus, nor is Christopher Plummer in The Fall of the Roman Empire. They have to make him into a crazy, the standard crazy decadent Roman emperor. They're all alike, Nero, Caligula, and in the case of Commodus, at least they didn't make him homosexual, which is often shorthand for crazy and decadent with those emperors, but they made him have this incestuous lust for his sister. That was kind of his character flaw that made him crazy. And they also had him probably killing his father. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think Commodus was groomed by Marcus Aurelius to become emperor. It just didn't work out. He was too young, for one thing. These emperors who take over too young just have, they're not ready for the job. It goes wrong in all kinds of ways. Just as Nero wanted to be an actor, Commodus just wanted to be a gladiator, really, and to drive hot cars. We're told about these vehicles that he had these fancy, magnificent vehicles he had that had things like, I believe there's something almost like an odometer on them. And there's also these awnings that you can bring up for shade and so forth. So we know he was into hot rods and sports. We're told he was, when he shot all those animals in the Colosseum, he didn't miss once. This man was a fantastic marksman. He was a man's man, really. That's who he was, but not suitable for being emperor. So I got to do Commodus. I got to do Elagabalus, the famous drag queen, or is it transsexual emperor? We don't quite know. I did get to do my own take on Elagabalus, which I've been wanting to do for a long time. And then we get up, of course, to the really rocky years when we have one emperor after another and all the coups, and Rome essentially becomes a military dictatorship. I mean, it's the model for all the ones that come after. And we end up with the military dictator of all time, Constantine, who is also called by Ramsay MacMullen. When I was doing the research, Ramsay MacMullen is certainly one of the greatest historians of that transitional period. And in one of his biographies of Constantine, he said he was the most bloodthirsty of all the emperors. And that stopped me cold. I'm like, wait, Saint Constantine, the first Christian emperor, the most bloodthirsty. You have some competition back there, don't you? Why would MacMullen make such a bold statement? Well, Commodus, he's mad, bad, and dangerous to know, especially if you're a member of his family. So we had plenty of material for the murderous side of Constantine, as well as the transition. And one of the ways I united the story and also kind of carried the history forward, my family, the Pannaria's family, have become, through accidents of history, real experts in architecture and art. And they know how to decorate palaces. They know how to build things, get the right artisans in. This is what they do. You go to these people. So they are there for many of these artifacts that we carry so much of that story through. The column of Trajan, which is so vital, the column of Marcus Aurelius that follows it, and the stories that it tells with those images, especially of the rain miracle, which becomes a central part of the story in Dominus, because we see how that rain miracle, first credited to an Egyptian priest called Harnuphus, who calls upon Mercury to help the Roman troops who are without water. They're besieged by barbarians. A great rainstorm comes. It not only gives water to quench the thirst of the Roman soldiers, but it floods and kills the barbarians. So this is, a central miracle that we see depicted on the column of Marcus Aurelius. But through time, that is transformed into a Christian miracle. And how does that happen? We have a wonderful account of how that happens. And we're actually able to follow that through history up to the time of Constantine. So the Pannaria's family are in on the building of the column of Marcus Aurelius. They're in on many of the other famous palaces and artifacts, right up until the building program of Maxentius, who is the emperor defeated by Constantine, who gets a really bad rap in the history because he's the loser. This is how these things happen, right? His name is blackened. But if you really look at Maxentius, we really don't know how popular he was within the city of Rome. We know that he's celebrating the anniversary of his reign the day before the big battle with Constantine. So he manages to do it before a full house in the Colosseum. It must have been a magnificent spectacle to put on. We know that he has transformed the Colossus, which is still standing, the statue outside the Colosseum. He somehow made that to resemble Romulus, or Romulus' son, the namesake, his dead son, whom he wants to immortalize and tie back to the ancient Romulus. So we know that Maxentius has a building program, which is very much tying him in with ancient Rome, all the old Roman virtues going all the way back. Constantine is really the usurper. He's the outsider who's marching south. What will happen? Maxentius makes that fateful choice, perhaps encouraged by what goes on in the Colosseum that day, to go out the next day and face Constantine in the field outside the city. Not a good idea. And we know what follows after that. So that brings us up to the end of Dominus. And the real question for my family is, what will happen with them? Constantine is already beginning to build his new city on the Bosphorus. That's going to be, obviously, he wants to start moving things there. He'll be able to repopulate it with a totally Christian milieu. That's going to be a very different center of empire than Rome. So the Pannaria face the choice, do they want to stay with Constantine and help build that city, which is what they're equipped to do? Or will they stay in Rome? And what will happen to the Fascinum? What will happen to this centuries, millennia old talisman? Does it have a place in the new city of Constantine? So that is the dilemma that faces them at the end of the book. And that becomes the end of the trilogy, I think. That's a place to end, is to start with Hercules way at the beginning of ancient Rome and to bring it all the way up to Constantine the first Christian emperor and the story that that tells. So that's kind of a précis of what I've been doing for the last 30 years and where I've ended up. And this talk really means a lot to me because I won't be doing a lot of public appearances for this book. Obviously, we're in the middle of COVID still, the pandemic. So this opportunity to speak to a very informed audience that may or may not know my books, but certainly knows this material from the ground up, from the artifact up, I think it will have a special appreciation for these books. And since I won't be doing a lot of talks, this is my chance to kind of do maybe a final pitch, because I've kind of announced my retirement when I've ended the Roma Rosa series with Gordianus, with the assassination of Caesar. And now, having managed to do this trilogy, I feel really honored as an author and really lucky that I have managed to see through not one, but two long series of books, many hundreds of thousands of words, from beginning to end over a period of a career. They've let me do this year after year. The books have always sold well enough I could keep doing this and keep at it. I've been allowed to do it at my own pace. The research has been, as you know, this just so much. It's the hard work is the writing for me anyway. The research, God, what a delight it has been to go to cities, to look at ruins, to look at artifacts in museums, to do so much literary research in libraries about these stories. And we have such fantastic material for it. I've been immersed in this for 30 years. I have told people I'm essentially a graduate student without portfolio. I'm just going wherever the material takes me. What a joy that has been to do that and to be able to write these books and to do them pretty much to my own satisfaction. I've never had to make compromises for the publisher, and to actually get these finished. So the chance to do this talk means a lot to me. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for the work you people do out there in the field, because I do keep up with the literature from time to time and things that have meant something to these books, especially in the last book, in Dominus. One of the things that ties it up is the Scepter of Maximus, which we know from recent architecture in Rome, they think they found. Who knows? Is this really the Scepter of Maximus himself and his insignia? It was found a few years ago. I read the articles in Archaeology magazine. When that appeared, I hadn't yet even started writing Dominus. But when I saw that about the Scepter of Maximus, I thought, bingo, we've got a place to go. We have a goal to get to. How in the world are my characters going to actually know about the Scepter of Maximus, which one of the archaeologists posits that this was hidden away. The way they found it sort of bundled up and where it was put, they feel like these were things important to Maximus, which even as he was defeated and his head is carried into Rome on a stake in front of Constantine, that these may have been hidden away by his supporters and the people who didn't want Constantine to make these vast changes. So how are we going to get that into my book? Well, that's my challenge as a novelist. But for that artifact, to have an artifact to kind of drive that story forward and wrap it around really meant something about being able to get that book done. So thank you for having me, and thank you for continuing to do. And also, I got to say, these virtual Rome things that are being created, none of this existed when I started this series. We didn't even have the internet when I started this series. And over time, I have been able to visit Rome virtually through so many new models that are being built up, thanks so much to the archaeology as well as the literary evidence. I remember a particularly important moment was in this book, no, it was actually in the previous book, in Empire, when we build the column of Trajan. I wanted to know if we're in Rome, when that column first goes up, if we can get to the top of the column, which of course the architects and the builders are going to do, they're going to be up there. What do we see? What do we see? Exactly a 360 from that. Well, you can do all the literary reading you want and look at maps. It is really hard to get a grip on that. but I think Google Earth had just put up this virtual ancient Rome, which I don't know, I haven't been there in a while, but it loaded so badly on my machine, it would take forever to load this thing. If you made the least wrong move, you'd lose where you were. But I was able to navigate through long trial and error to put myself down right on top of the column of Trajan and to do a 360 view. And that, can we see the Tiber? Well, yes, we can see the Tiber right over there. What does the Capitoline Hill look like? There it is. What does the Colosseum? So also that virtual reconstruction of Rome has been so important in my imaginary, being able to transport myself almost physically back there and to see what my characters see and to inhabit it that way. So thanks for having me. Thanks for all the work that you do in the field. And I hope you'll put Dominus on your reading list, because this is kind of, this could be my bow. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. That was absolutely amazing. I want to thank Stephen for sharing his time. If you enjoyed this lecture, we encourage you to donate either on our website, archaeological.org/donate, or text donate or give to 833-965-2840. Or even better, become a member and benefit from all our events. Stephen, truly, that was wonderful. Thank you. And we have a lot of questions, so we'll get right to it.